Okay, welcome to Chronicles of Arcanis for our third edition in the inaugural season. Once again, I have contacted and been contacted by one of the old school Arcaniacs. So when I started playing 2002, really, and then I really started supporting at the major conventions, and I had my own local play group. Wizards of the Coast still had a store in a mall. It was like right next to my condo complex that I was living in at the time. So I ran a regular game of Arcanus there. And one of the most important things to me was getting more and more exposures, letting more and more people see and experience the uniqueness. At that time, I'm in my 30s. I'm way past my murder hobo days. I like a little more complexity. I understand that life has more nuance. And so when I came across Arcanus with its shades of gray, it just struck that chord that, whatever that dissonant Kadeshian triad that makes you go, whoa, what am I looking at here? So, one of the things I think is most amazing is I didn't make this happen. What happened is that this is such an amazing campaign that it spread and spread and spread and spread. It became the biggest convention tabletop RPG events in both Origins and Gen Con. And somehow the amazing aspects, all of this intrigue, all of this shades of gray made its way overseas, where today's guest, Dan Melgar, has become really the ambassador for Arcanus to the British Isles. So he's been able to work around his schedule and take a little time and talk to us about his Arcanus experience, how he discovered it, and then we'll talk about his character. So Dan, introduce yourself to the Arcaniacs at large and tell us about your D&D experience and how you got into Arcanus.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan. Some of you may remember me as Dan Jewell, but due to a name change, I'm now Dan Melgar. So my name is on the Coriani Chronicles t-shirt with my character Tula Bibi. But yes, I began with second edition AD&D and went to conventions. We had a UK Gen Con back then
Mm.
and playing lots of one shots in the Forgotten Realms and Greyhawk. But when WotC took over and third edition came out, we got introduced to Arcanis by our friendly gaming store. It's called Hidden Fortress. They went over to Gen Con because they felt that they had a vision for gaming stores, that it wasn't just going to be sort of like musty old men, and it was going to be an inclusive environment, a bit of a social center.
Mm-hmm.
And they played some Arcanis, Ed Proctor and his partner at the time, Jane. And they really enjoyed the setting. They enjoyed the shades of grey, the dichotomies involved, and thought that, do you know what? This is great. I can use diplomacy. I can use my role play skills to
Mm-hmm.
interact with the environment and feel like I'm making a difference and not just letting the dice tell a story or not tell a story. So Ed decided to bring it to Southampton. That's where the shop was based. And it was having regular Living Greyhawk every 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So he decided to get the group together, probably about 30 of us, I think it was. And he gave us a spiel about Arcanis. He gave us this primer, maybe about 2, 3 hours long. And then we to help character creation, obviously to sell some books. Basically, he saw a very interesting campaign that certain material didn't touch upon with the shades of grey
Yeah.
aspect.
So,
So
real quick, can you give me a shout out again to this gaming store, and are they still up and running?
unfortunately, they're no longer up and running. It fell flat about 10 plus years ago, unfortunately. It was a shame. It was a shame. Lots of us remember it. I live probably about a 3 minute walk away from where the store was.
Mm-hmm.
So people would crash at mine.
Mm-hmm.
At times, I would have 6 people sleeping in my lounge and just my spare bedroom, and it was just crazy. So, and that was once a month. It was a really good social environment.
Yeah.
And with Ed being sort of, I would say he was the forerunner in the UK for pushing Arcanis.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew the people that were into Living Greyhawk
Mm-hmm.
and into our Living City, because our Living City was still running at the time. And so he managed to get those people on board so that if there was a Living Greyhawk event somewhere around the country, we could populate it with a couple of Living Arcanis adventures, intro mods.
Let me interject real quick here. So, people who may not be familiar with some of the things that were going on at really the beginning of this millennia into the mid aughts, where how convention play was changing from like these one shot given a pre-gen, the living part came in. So Living City, remind me, that took place, that's Forgotten Realms Waterdeep.
No, so in the US, it was based in Ravensbluff, but in the UK, we had a small town called Sabrina.
Interesting.
Yeah,
So I know that part of what made Living Arcanus possible was how involved Pedro was with Living City and I believe Living Force. So I know that as those two were winding down, he was definitely recruiting very heavily among that player base to come into Arcanus. I think the belief was that Living City had people who were more interested in the role playing aspect of the part of Arcanus where there are adventures where if combat happens, you've actually lost and you don't even realize it. And
yeah.
so I know that Peter was definitely making a strong effort to reach out among the other coordinators in the RPGA to bring all of you folks into the Arcanus wing. So what did you start doing? Where did you start playing? What kind of character did you have?
So we started playing in Southampton. We had regular weekends. What I mean, regular like once a month for Arcanis. To begin with, it was intermingled with some Living Greyhawk, but the paradigm shifted to actually people want to play Arcanis more than Living Greyhawk. And I realized that the campaign was there was a lot of lost history there, and I was working more than full-time hours. And so I contacted Pedro, and I'm like, Pedro, is there anything I can do in regards to having like all the knowledge skills as a rogue? And he's like, no, Wizards of the Coast will sue us because there was something that I mentioned, like, hey, does this transfer across? I knew it wouldn't, but have you got anything similar? And he's like, no, if we do something similar, Wizards of the Coast won't like that.
Mm.
So he said, what you can do is create an Altherian, and they get all the knowledge skills as a Val or BB. And I'm like, okay, I really liked that idea. And I also liked the treasure hunting, exploring aspect of finding out about the history, the religion, the arcana, the religious aspects of being a hero in Arcanis.
So let me
So,
interject real quick because you have thrown in some Arcanus jargon. And when I took my philosophy courses, they said whenever you hear a jargon word, you stop, you verify you actually understand what that jargon means. So, Valababy, explain what a Valababy is.
Val Bibi is one of the Valinor that is related to Althars, the god of knowledge. He decided to intermingle his DNA, so to say, with the faithful, and the Val Bibi bloodline was born. And they have traits that can be traced back to Althars. So knowledge, linguistics. They had precognition for some reason. I can't remember all of their
That's
abilities.
all right. And of course, then there was the access to blast powder.
Oh,
So
yes.
one of the things that I'm exploring as well, I think paradigm concepts, they actually set the tone for a lot of things we see today, right? So Darkkin. I was talking about Regan Wrath, Darkkin, that in third edition, there were no tieflings
No.
in Living City, Living Greyhawk. There were Darkkin in Living Arcanus, and I still to this day believe the Darkkin are way better than the Tiefling that was finally released. And now we have Valinor, and of course, there's the Asimir.
Yes.
So, you know, this celestially gifted race, again, they were doing it first. I'm saying this over and over again because I want people to understand that a lot of the things that people are really, really into, that they're like, yeah, this is what I like about how gaming has progressed. That foundation was set 20 some years ago by this small third party publisher that was putting together a really mature game, that the gamers that were involved were thinking people and they were capable of being involved in morally, ethically gray situations and still have a good time.
Yeah.
All right, so you're playing a Val,
So,
you're skills based.
and I decided to gender bend because at the time I was rewatching one of my favorite animated shows called Pirates of the Dark Water. And they had a rogue swashbuckling type of character. Not that I didn't want to do a swashbuckler, but she knew some of the world, but she didn't know all of it. And that sort of appealed to me. Sort of, I know the basics, the foundation of the setting,
Mm-hmm.
but let me explore, let me find out more. And as I progressed in level, obviously my knowledge skills got better, history, religion, arcana, those things.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was her learning about her environment in the adventures, making those roles, understanding what was important and what wasn't important. And sometimes it would be that the unimportant was actually the most important.
Yeah, we were discussing about the gladius of light that are found very, very, very early in the first story arc
Yes.
and how important. I mean, it was funny because every table I ever ran, they'd get it and they didn't know what to do with them. They would play
I
with
had one.
them, they would poke themselves in the head and go, look, ma,
Mhm.
but lo and behold.
Yep. So part of playing the knowledge rogue was also to help the GM get the information of the modules, the adventure of the campaign, because there wasn't any source books. There
Right.
was just the original campaign setting, and it wasn't heavy with anything. It was play it and find out. And I didn't want to lose that information. So I thought, you know what? I'll create this character. It might not be the most successful. And I had a great time playing her. She originally was going down the route of Temple Raider. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if you remember that
Yeah.
prestige
Yep.
class. And then obviously when the shift happened and we moved away from WotC's products, she went to be an Emerald Society archaeologist and the Urban Sentinel Ranger. So things that weren't in other books, as in were only in the paradigm. And I really enjoyed the fun they had creating these classes.
Mm-hmm.
You could see they really did enjoy it. And I played her up until I think she was about 18th. And then, unfortunately, when the campaign came to its natural end,
Mm-hmm.
we never got those adventures in the UK. So we had a bit of uh, yeah.
Yeah, it's frustrating.
Yeah, so
Mm.
obviously we'd have to travel all the way to Origins to take part in the final battle interactive. But
Yeah.
yeah, but obviously that wasn't then released for home play because it was the end of the campaign, quite rightly. But it did leave a lot of us sort of like, oh, we never actually found out what fully happened. But that's history. So
Part of, yeah, unfortunately, this has been one of the tensions, obviously, from the very beginning. Was Arcanus really made its reputation as a convention setting because of the devotion and the time put in by the staff. And then, of course, there was Sean Molly at the very beginning, who was the basically the administrator and coordinator, and he did an excellent job and put together these massive battle interactives. And like you said, they're difficult to send and replicate on a smaller scale. Not impossible, but it loses a lot of what makes them special. I was at the LARP at Gen Con, where whoever it was that was wearing the code of 1,000 eyes or whatever that bizarre thing was, they showed up and were immediately killed. The reasons the gnomes have a homeland, or at least a place to stay in Millendeer, was because that I was the gnome NPC. That was my goal, was to at least find some place. And the way they set that up is, so I'm the NPC, I'm sitting at a table and
yeah,
people choose to come and help me for whatever reason. And then I have various resources and information, and I send them out to wheel and deal for me. And that was awesome, you know. That was really good. Did you ever get to do any of the large battle
I I
interactives?
went to one at Origins where I was Tula. I decided to not gender bend with the dressing up. I don't have the legs for it.
Understood.
And
Yeah. I had to shave once, from my legs, and it looks silly once I shaved my legs. I'm like, no, this is dumb.
yeah. So I dressed as the male version of Tula. So it was good. I got some nice sort of desert combat gear. So from our army surplus store, I got an army backpack, which I still use today as my gaming bag, which is just so durable.
Yeah.
And it's great going through customs in America because they're like, "Oh, are you armed forces?" I'm like, "No," and they try to redirect me to the line that's
For the yeah. I hear you.
yeah, I like, no, 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 I'm not, I
No.
normally have my hair short, so I'm not sure. So, yeah, so I did go to one. I found it a little bit overwhelming, in all fairness. I enjoyed it. I met some nice people that I'm still friends with today at the con. They, live in America. I message them now and then. So that's made a nice historic community. Unfortunately, it's not there at the moment, but I would like it to be back.
So, what do you see with, your boots on the ground, as it were? What could be happening to help support Arcanus in England?
We don't have that many big conventions or games days anymore. One of our friendly, well, I wouldn't necessarily call them friendly, but gaming stores was a franchise,
Oh.
and they would push you to have like a £5 coffee every hour for everybody at the table because they needed to make money for the venue. Um,
Mm.
and lots of their chain has ceased trading. So with all the board game cafes, I'm not sure if that's the environment to be running
Hmm.
role-playing games, because I've tried it before and it's very noisy, it's very chaotic. Obviously, some people only rent the table for an hour, so there's lots of sort of external stimuli that takes away the immersion. I remember playing Children of Leviathan many, many years ago, obviously,
Hmm.
and this was at Hidden Fortress, and our GM was a lovely guy by the name of Ian Guy. And we left the table shaking, feeling as though we were going to be hunted by those natives. We were there pushing the boats out.
That was a Scott Charlton, right? That was in the Pirate Isles.
Yes.
Yep, I remember that one.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're kind of veering into what's happened to our communities, because it's not just, in England, the demise of the local gaming store is pretty prevalent because they've become not the place to gather and play. I'm actually a fan of this pay to play model, making we were talking about that 20 some years ago. Oh man, if only I could make a living as a dungeon master. How can I do this? Well, now it can be done. So I don't begrudge it. But what I do begrudge is that it's becoming the only way for people to be introduced to the hobby. And as a chef by profession, spent a lot of time in a lot of different restaurants, worked for a lot of different people. And one of the guys that was one of the more successful as far as running the establishment really, really tight and making money. You have to give it away to make money.
Yeah.
That one of the issues I see with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro when they're looking at the intellectual property of Dungeons and Dragons is that they don't understand that in the restaurant industry, the core three books are what we call a loss leader. Not everybody's going to buy all core three books. What you're going to do is you're going to sell a whole bunch of players' handbooks, but the other books are there so that you can sell the other stuff, right? A lost leader in a restaurant is you have this really amazing dish, but it's so amazing. It's like a signature dish, and people come just because they heard this is it. They want to try it, and you're making a tiny, tiny percent of profit on it because once they have it, most people don't come back and have the same thing over and over again. They're going to try new things. So that's how you get new people and then, of course you in fine dining, you're doing wine and cocktails. So it's the same concept. But what WotC and Hasbro are doing wrong is they don't understand that when you're upselling cocktails, wine, appetizers to a table, that upsell has to be their decision. that you can't set it up so that the only way to participate, the only way to enjoy your meal is to have these things. And they just don't realize that part. In fact, I don't know if you saw the news a couple hours ago, the CEO of WotC stepped down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that just happened. The hobby's in flux. I see a lot of changes having been out of it and coming back in. And so one of the things I want to figure out is what needs to happen. You have different eyes. I see, I'm looking around here in New York, and what I've seen that is successful and I'm intrigued about is role-playing gaming clubs, private clubs. You pay a membership through Patreon or whatever particular model. They have a clubhouse. They have a games. This particular place, they run Magic, and of course they have an LLC, so they can buy direct and do all kinds of big tournaments. But they also host role-playing games, and they have the tables, and they have a gaming library. So that's one of the models I'm interested in looking at. So now I'm wondering, what do you think? Is something like that viable in England?
We do have a couple of those in the Southampton area that I can speak about. One of them's all about different role-playing games, and they meet every week. And then we've also got a community centre, which they've got a long-term contract with the community centre to store all of their terrain, all of their gaming stuff, so you don't have to keep going there backwards and forwards with everything every week. And that's a regular Friday night, and that's been going on for 10 plus years. But that's more for Warhammer and things. But again, that's not anything to do with Games Workshop. It's an independent group of people who've gone, do you know what? We can't play at the store. The store's not
Right.
open. Friday evenings, we need to find our own venue. And again, you pay subs to be able to attend, very similar to the Patreon model. So for the upkeep of this long-term rental. So I'm assuming the Guildhall, which is the role-playing version of that in Southampton, has something similar. I haven't had time to actually go, unfortunately.
So what kind of support can we send you from the US to help build your Arcanus circle?
Gen Con UK died many, many years ago. Its last two shows were not very successful here, and Gen Con pulled the plug on it to concentrate more on indie. So we now have an event called UK Games Expo.
That's the UK UJ or whatever, UKUJ or something. UKG. Yeah.
Yeah, GE.
Okay. I've
Yeah.
heard some problematic issues around, oh, shall we go into the new DEI and issues with all of these new warnings that you put at a table, and people say, oh, you've offended me and I need to stop everything right now. And
Yes,
or you
that
offended me and I
that
didn't tell anybody, and now
I
that
was
guy's
I
gone.
I was at that show that year
Yeah.
that happened, and obviously that did become the talk of the role-playing community. That was definitely a full-on moment that even one of our tabloids reported on it.
Wow.
So yes, what the guy did was absolutely extreme, but he chose to do that. So now you have to submit things and say, what are the themes? Now I've submitted a couple of Arcanis events that I'm running for this year's, and I don't have to do any of that. We don't have to do that.
You don't identify yourself as a mature, because I mean,
Oh,
that's
I
what
do.
I
I
do
put down that I don't like running Arcanis
to
for people
children.
under the age of 18. I think that it's unfair on the other random people who are adults at the table. It's not that I don't want to run for children,
You just
or
don't want to
young
run
adults.
Arcanus.
Yes.
I hear you.
So
I'm the
um
same way. I feel the same way.
I just want to give the players a good experience, and rather than going, I had a child at my table, so it completely changed the dynamic. And also, UK Games Expo actually changed one of their policies because of a game I was running a few years prior to the Tales of the Loop incident. I was running a 2-rounder for Pathfinder Society, and all of the players sit down for round one. and one of them is a father and son. The son is possibly about 8 years old, and he's a young 8 years old. Clearly, the dad wanted the cohort fee, and the dad decided to inform us, the table, that he hasn't signed up for round two. And I'm like, okay, that's not a problem, but my son has. So I'm
Mm.
like, what? He's like, I'm going to be GMing in the same room as this.
Mm.
And I was just completely taken aback by it. The other four tickets that were sold for the table were all very close friends of mine. Now, I work for the National Health Service,
Hmm.
so I've been criminal reference checked,
Hmm.
the enhanced edition to be able to work with children and things like that.
Awesome.
One of my friends at the table, she's an assistant head teacher at a high school, and her partner was there. One of our friends who works for the MOD, again, enhanced criminal reference check. So everybody else at the table were fine from a criminal reference check. But we were just taken aback that we didn't really think about it at all too much, because I wanted to get the game going and I thought, okay, let's see how this goes. And I spoke to the RPG manager, I think the next day, and said this happened. And he's like, "You're not a babysitter.
Exactly. Bingo.
So the child came up to me during the second round and went, "Can I use the toilet?" And
Oh, no.
I'm like, you need to go see your dad over there. I'm washing my hands of this altogether. Not at all. This is not happening. So UK Games Expo changed their policy that children have to be accompanied during role-playing games, because it was really a common sense sort of situation that didn't need a policy, but clearly it did.
Well, I mean, look, as I've been saying to friends for a while, gamers are the best of people and the worst of people. And I have lots of friends that are gamers that I wouldn't want children sitting around the table playing games with them, because they're pretty coarse and they can be very crass. And what I tell people is, look, man, I grew up on a farm. I'm a Navy vet and I'm a chef. So yeah, I grew up in a barn. I swear like a sailor and I curse like a chef. I'm gruff, I'm grumpy, I'm abrupt. But I also know how to turn all that off and be appropriate in front of children. And the truth is we all know there is a solid percentage of our fellow gamers who are just jerks,
Mhm.
who will just refuse to change their behavior because it impinges on their fun.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how long ago was that? Because I remember seeing those policies starting to come up, but it wasn't like until after like 2005.
It was when it moved over to the Hilton Hotel, which is next to the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham. So it wasn't early days when it was at the Masonic Hall, which some people still argue the Masonic Hall has a lot more character than a big warehouse.
Always did.
Yes, it was like the central Masonic Hall for the Midlands. So many secret passageways and things.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely had some ambience to it.
Hmm.
But no, the NEC is wonderful. It's a massive beast now. Definitely Paradigm should speak to the guys that run the RPG section there and see what can happen. They love exclusives. So,
Well,
but
maybe if we can turn a buck with these podcasts and YouTube video channel stuff, that we can afford to send some of the official PCI folk out there sometime. And
yes, that would be great.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's absolutely how you make it happen, right? You have an exclusive event, you have the author, you have the publisher, you have an artist, you have all of these key things, and you tie it into some sort of special giveaway or, product release or something like that.
Yeah. So yeah, so UK Games Expo's doing quite well. From it's now been in the NEC for quite a few years now, but it is a very expensive beast. Not Gen Con expensive, but
Right.
still quite expensive, that it's not for the cheap gamer, really. So
Yeah. So I haven't been to Gen Con since 2007. I'm going to go back this year for the first time. I'm going to go to Origins as a GM for Paradigm, but I'm just going to go and hang out. And yeah, It has become, I used to be able to go like $400 for room and got me into the event. And now, I mean, $400, that's like one night in a
But
room in
this
some of these
reflects your sentiment earlier of GMs charging, and that's some people's entry point. Some people can't even afford to go to the events to play these one shots, to dip their toe into this, that, and the other to see what they like, because the price tag is so high.
Yeah. So I would refer back in that I talk about food and fine wine, and luxury exists for a reason. My issue is, from my point of view, is everybody should have an opportunity to experience some luxury so that then they can make the decision for themselves. Oh, how do I want to spend my money? I made a decision a long time ago that I'm not going to spend my money on a fancy car or a new car. I'm going to just get rid of a vehicle altogether and I'm going to buy suits, or now I'm going to go to conventions. I buy wine, I buy gaming books.
Yeah.
We're collectors. That's part of it. So here we are. Now we're, wow, 20 some years into the campaign. Have you been playing much of the fifth edition at all?
So I started running GMing on the 19th of February 22, and I have something like 68 volunteer points.
Wow. So you have been running a fair number of events along the way.
Yes.
So
I've
what's your advice to me is because I'm going to be heading into, running a table for the first time and quite some time at a convention. What's going on with Arcanis these days as a fifth edition game?
so I went to a really nice seminar at Gen Con last year, and it was about murder mysteries,
Mm.
role-playing games with a murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And what the designer, I think they were plugging the gumshoe system. I don't know it, but it sounded like a really interesting seminar. So I went, and they said, at no point should a failed dice roll stall the story. So they've said, look at it from degrees of success, give them a red herring that will then lead them on to something else to get them back on track.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't stop the dialogue. Don't stop the conversation with the players that they go, oh, well, we failed that. What? Clearly we
All
were.
right, roll perception. Oh, we failed. And now what?
So I've been having this discussion recently about perception and the fact that it is quite an overpowered skill.
I love it. The home game I'm playing right now, I'm playing a rogue, and that's just what I decided. As I was learning, because I had to teach myself fifth edition, and all of a sudden I went, oh, perception is everything. So, I take a rogue, I take expertise and perception,
Yeah.
it was roll, right? I had first character I've rolled up in years. My very first roll is an 18. I went 18 wisdom rogue. I find everything.
Well, so look at the other skill, which is investigation. How
Right.
often does that come up versus perception? So as a GM, I've got this mental sort of differentiation between them both, as in perception is something that's happening to you, where investigation is something that you're doing to something.
So it's a spot check search from third edition. And this is how I used to say search is an active thing. You actually have to look for things. Spot check is you notice stuff. Because I'm the perfect example in my real life, right? I'm going to look for something. God help me, I can't find it if I'm purposely looking. But I can just be randomly walking around and go, oh my God, look at that thing that no one else notices. So to me, that's the same thing. Investigation requires thought and
Yes.
purpose, and perception is having the wherewithal to realize something's just not quite right with the environment.
Mm-hmm. So I was speaking to my player base the other day and saying, the airflow from a secret door, you feel that, and so therefore that's the perception role,
Mm-hmm.
or the passive perception. You've
Mm-hmm.
noticed that the air currents don't work quite right in this room, where the investigation role would be you're looking for secret doors, you're looking at the wall, and they're like, oh, okay. So because lots of people want it to be everything, and I just feel that that's taking away from other people
Who
who have
specialize? Yeah.
Yeah, and I also feel that some people don't share their skills about it all because everybody's got to have perception. So I've not tried dumbing down perception. I've just tried to clarify what it does.
Hmm.
So, and people seem to be okay with that. I had one player say no, but he's always glass half empty. But he doesn't like it because his rogue in Living Arcanis has got a passive perception of something like 26.
Right.
And you're just like, great. He's like, I just want to make sure that we don't miss anything. I'm like, yeah, but sometimes missing something is also a good thing, especially in Arcanis. So,
Well, yeah, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good, as it were. Don't be the perfect at one thing so that you're not good at other things.
yes.
Yeah, let's kind of, your day is a little later than mine. Let's get you off to the end of your day and give me, kind of a prognostication. Where do you see things going? What do you look forward to in Arcanus over the next year?
Well, hopefully I'm going to get a mod out. I've been procrastinating about that, in all fairness. Sorry, Cody. So I'm hoping that I can be one of the Arcanus authors. What I would like to see a bit more of is some more First City. So I feel that the player base in the UK, the ones I've been running for anyway, have experienced maybe the first 10 chapters of year two,
Hmm.
and predominantly they're set in the first city. And I feel that some people want to call that home, especially with the fact that some of them have apartments in the
Hmm.
first city. So I feel that because I've played season three and there's the shift out of the first city, I think will potentially surprise some of the players because it's not centered around, because some of the I've managed to garner probably at least 20. I know it doesn't sound a lot, but 20 new players at a convention
Well, that's a lot.
last year, and I think we had about 10 this year at the 7-day convention. And I feel those people like the first city. They like that they're in this environment that isn't safe. And obviously, I know what's coming up,
Hmm.
but also they're taken out of the first city. So I'm not sure if they then need to find reasons for their character to be doing all this heroic stuff across Anara. So, I know that there was Sweet Sorrow that was set in the first city, year three soft point. I don't really want to run that for them because that has spoilers in it for the end of season two. I don't know. I feel the Blessed Land source book
Hmm.
has so much more to give from
Okay. Yeah,
stories.
I agree. Yeah, good. Yeah, yeah. Let's close a little bit then on this and a little review, because that's the other thing I try to do is we've already talked about the codex and we've talked about the player's guide for this edition. So tell us a bit about the Blessed Land and why that book is intriguing to you.
The campaign setting is a nice overview. It's a nice starting point where I think the Blessed Lands book itself goes into some finer details. It talks about places that you can see on a map, which they've then included imagery of the temples, the buildings, these locations, and given us, the player base, this nice, rich environment which is corrupted by this curse, hence it's unsettled, that actually it feels very heroic to try and right the wrongs in this area, because actually there's been thousands of wrongs because of it being the first city and this onion of layers. And I feel that, just ripping off one layer reveals a couple more colors of the wallpaper behind, that you're just like, actually, what is going on in this environment? And just the way the Deathmongers, for instance, how they worship some of the core gods is a little bit weirder than the Mother Church and
Hmm.
the Melinda Church. That actually it's this dichotomy that you've got of, well, are they blasphemous? No, because this is what they do in this area because they're in the first city. So you've got all of these elements where people have to juggle, what should I be offended about? Because this is natural here, but back home in Grand Corian, the Inquisition would be having
Hmm.
word. So I really like that everybody's on edge but for a good reason. You know, you're like, what's going to happen next? What's going to introduce themselves in this environment where even the weather isn't stable? And that's what I quite like about the Blessed Lands. It just has a lot more depth to it. Again, you could argue the Sethragor book, but the Sethragor book, there aren't many adventures set there. So it's very difficult to try and build that rapport with that region. But you can with year 2 and that book. You can reference both and go, oh, here's a map, this is where we're traveling to, oh, this is going to take us through these mountain ranges. And I just feel that there's a lot more meat.
Okay, so it sounds like we need an Invisible Kings type program for the Blessed Lands.
Well, yes, but some of the player base over here feel that the intros, they're great, but once you've played them, you have to play them again if you want to create a secondary character. It's not,
I get what you're saying.
it's great. Obviously, we can play it differently, you know, and I've run, I think it's In Plain Sight so many times now that actually people completely perform that differently. So that's fine. But there aren't any mods, adventures that are coming out for low level, because the campaign is leveling to, just say, what is it, at 9th now?
Yeah, I think so.
That some of the player base over here are like, well, that's great, but we can't play that yet because we have to. And they went, but why aren't they producing adventures for like more 4th to 7th stuff? You know, the caravan duty stuff, you know, that you wouldn't expect a 9th, 10th level character to go on. And I went, basically, we need people to step up to
write some adventures.
Write some adventures, write to Cody, say, I've got an idea for this. And maybe the other way around, say, hey, Cody, can you send me a blurb of an adventure you want written? And I'll go back to you.
What are you looking for?
Yeah.
Where are the holes? What gap can I help you fill?
Yeah, so maybe an Invisible King's Blessed Lands would be quite worthwhile. I just feel that it has a good grounding. It has this source book, it has the art for it. It just is a really nice package.
All right. Well, are you planning to come over this way this summer for conventions?
I am one of the Origin GMs.
All right, then. We will meet then, and we'll talk about this idea of an Invisible Kings for the Blessed Land in more detail then.
Of course.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it. This is awesome as always. You know, I love reconnecting with the Arcaniacs, and I look forward to seeing you at Origins.
Cool. Lovely to meet you again.
All right. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.